outsiders are revealing to me the true story of how Meghan Markle failed.
Something unexpected unfolded on that stage, and the shift in the room was immediate. Prince Harry stood before the audience, delivering what appeared to be a composed and carefully structured speech. His tone was steady, his posture confident, and the crowd was fully focused on him, listening closely in what felt like a formal, controlled setting where everything typically follows a clear plan. But then, without warning, the moment changed. Meghan Markle suddenly stepped onto the stage. There was no introduction, no cue from organizers, no indication that this was part of the program. It was abrupt enough that people in the audience visibly reacted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, attention snapped toward the stage, and a quiet tension settled over the room. For a few seconds, everything seemed to pause. The audience sat in complete silence, watching closely as the situation unfolded, sensing that this wasn't part of the expected flow and that something slightly uncomfortable might be happening right in front of them. Moments like this are rarely addressed openly, especially when they involve two high-profile figures sharing the same stage in front of a live audience. For years, there has been a noticeable pattern in how they present themselves publicly.
And she goes around and she even ignores him.
Harry would often take a slight step back, allowing Meghan to move forward and take the lead. It became something people quietly recognized over time, a familiar dynamic that seemed almost expected whenever they appeared together. But this time, that rhythm didn't play out the way it usually does. Instead of the smooth coordination people were used to seeing, there was a subtle disconnect. Meghan appeared ready to step into the spotlight once again, as if anticipating the same response she had received in the past. However, the reaction she seemed to expect never arrived. There was no applause to welcome the moment, no supportive cheers rising from the crowd, not even the kind of polite clapping that typically fills a formal room. Instead, a noticeable silence settled in, heavy, still, and impossible to ignore, making the moment feel far more uncomfortable than anyone in the audience had anticipated. And that moment was only the beginning.
Hi everybody.
This guy with the purple jacket is trying to block her from going on stage.
What unfolded on stage didn't just end there. It carried on in the form of quiet whispers, exchanged glances, and hushed conversations that lingered long after the event was over. People who were close to the situation began hinting at something deeper, mentioning possible embarrassment, concerns over image control, and a level of tension behind the scenes that no one seemed willing to address publicly. If the silence in the room felt heavy, what followed afterward felt even more intense. Observers started asking a question that, while simple on the surface, carried serious weight. Was this the first visible sign of a crack in what had always appeared to be a carefully managed and tightly controlled public image? Meanwhile, Prince Harry continued speaking, still in the middle of his address, his voice steady and composed, as if determined to carry on despite the unexpected shift happening just beside him.
Guy right behind Harry, the same guy that rejected to give her the mic last year, or is looking at her, he doesn't care.
When Meghan stepped forward with visible confidence, the shift in attention was immediate, but the reaction she received was not what anyone expected. Instead of admiration or encouragement, the room seemed to pause in confusion. Even Harry appeared briefly caught off guard, his expression tightening for a split second as he tried to process what was happening beside him. Meghan then placed her hand on his back, a gesture that, in the past, often signaled a smooth handover, a moment where he would naturally pass the microphone to her. But this time, that familiar pattern didn't follow through. Harry didn't step aside. His grip on the microphone tightened slightly, his posture became more firm, and instead of yielding the floor, he continued speaking as if nothing had changed. It was a subtle moment, easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention, but its impact on the room was immediate. That small break from expectation carried weight. It didn't feel like a simple pause or hesitation. It felt like a shift.
She ignores the guy.
Again, I have to be careful what I say.
Under the bright lights and in front of countless eyes, the dynamic between them seemed to change in real time. The atmosphere in the room responded just as quickly, turning what should have been a seamless, coordinated moment into something noticeably tense and uncertain. What should have felt like a smooth, coordinated moment between them suddenly turned awkward, almost uncomfortable to watch. It gave the impression of a disagreement unfolding in real time, yet without a single word being exchanged. Meghan maintained a controlled smile, but it looked forced, held in place as her hand remained on his back just a moment longer, signaling she wasn't quite ready to step away. Harry, however, didn't shift. He kept his attention fixed forward, eyes locked on the audience, continuing his speech with clear focus, as if determined not to disrupt his momentum or acknowledge the tension beside him. In that brief interaction, something undeniably felt different. The balance between them seemed to shift, and the audience picked up on it almost instantly. But instead of responding with applause or even polite acknowledgement, the room fell into complete stillness. No clapping, no quiet encouragement, not even a low murmur, just a thick, lingering silence that filled the space. Meghan remained standing beside him, her smile still in place, waiting for a reaction that never came, as the weight of that silence stretched longer than anyone expected. The seconds dragged on, each one making the atmosphere feel heavier than the last. What should have been a brief pause started to feel stretched and uncomfortable, as if time itself had slowed down. The tension in the room kept building, turning that silence into something almost overwhelming, the kind of quiet that feels louder than any reaction ever could.
Now, Harry has full control of the mic. When Meghan walked on stage, she could say, "Oh, here's my wife," and hand over the microphone. Did he do it?
Harry continued speaking, his voice steady and controlled, as though he had made a clear decision to push forward and not acknowledge the awkward moment unfolding right beside him. Meanwhile, Meghan remained in the spotlight, visibly waiting for some kind of response from the audience, a nod, a cheer, even a single person willing to break the silence. The crowd didn't respond with negativity or open discomfort. In some ways, it felt even more striking than that. They simply remained still and indifferent, watching without reacting, offering no energy to the moment at all, which only made the situation feel even colder. In a formal setting like that, this kind of cold indifference can feel especially harsh. It carries more weight than open criticism because there's nothing to respond to, just silence. Eventually, with no reaction to hold on to, Meghan subtly shifted her stance. She glanced toward Harry, then slowly stepped back toward the side of the stage. It wasn't a long distance, but the movement felt heavier than it should have. Later, some observers described the atmosphere as almost icy, the kind of moment where everyone senses something didn't go as expected, yet no one is willing to acknowledge it out loud. It was clear to many in the room that her exit hadn't been part of the plan. But what happened next made the situation even more interesting. By the following morning, that uncomfortable moment had almost vanished from major coverage. Instead of showing the full, unedited sequence, what appeared online were polished photos and carefully chosen images that told a completely different story. The images that circulated told a completely different story. Meghan appeared confident and composed, Harry standing beside her, both looking calm and perfectly aligned to anyone casually scrolling past. There was no trace of tension, no sign of the silence that had filled the room just hours earlier. Everything about those photos suggested a smooth, well-coordinated appearance, as if nothing unusual had taken place at all. What the cameras had actually captured in real time had been carefully trimmed away. In its place came polished visuals and clean headlines that reshaped the narrative, presenting the moment as controlled and seamless, almost as if the awkwardness on stage had never existed. But the internet moved faster than any curated coverage. Short, unedited clips began surfacing across social media, showing the moment exactly as it happened.
Just going around causing trouble, looking for a mic. Where is the mic? With that absolutely manic smile on her face.
Meghan stepping forward, the crowd going still, Harry holding onto the microphone and continuing without pause. Those clips spread rapidly, gaining millions of views within hours and bringing the raw version of events back into the spotlight. The contrast quickly became impossible to ignore. On television and in polished media coverage, everything appeared smooth, controlled, and perfectly aligned. But the unedited clips circulating online told a very different story, one that felt noticeably more awkward and unfiltered. Critics were quick to respond, accusing major outlets of shaping the narrative in a way that protected Meghan's public image, suggesting that what could have been seen as an uncomfortable moment had been softened or minimized in official coverage. On the other side, supporters pushed back, arguing that the situation was being overanalyzed and that people were reading far too much into brief body language and a few seconds of silence. Still, one thing became clear. Two completely different versions of the same moment were now circulating at the same time. One version existed in polished broadcasts and curated news segments, while the other spread rapidly across social media, where nothing had been edited or filtered, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. And that divide didn't feel accidental. Coverage of high-profile figures is almost always carefully managed, but this time it seemed to go beyond simply smoothing out the edges. It felt like the narrative itself had been reshaped, almost reversed, which led to a much bigger question starting to circulate online. People began asking how a moment like that could be reframed so quickly, and if it could happen this easily, how many other moments might have been quietly adjusted before anyone even noticed.
I curtsied as though I was like, "Pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty." Like, was that okay?
It's really quite...
The more people examined the situation, the more one idea started to take hold. This wasn't just about a brief interruption during a speech. It began to look like something larger, a struggle over who controls the story and how it's presented to the public. What unfolded on that stage started to feel like more than just an awkward exchange. For many observers, it looked like a small but telling glimpse into a deeper shift happening behind the scenes. For years, Harry had been seen as the one who naturally stepped aside, allowing Meghan to take the spotlight during public appearances. That dynamic had played out repeatedly, becoming almost expected whenever they appeared together. But in that moment on stage, something shifted in a way that was visible to everyone in the room. Harry didn't step back like he had so many times before. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was and continued speaking. To some viewers, that small decision didn't feel random. It looked like a boundary being set, a subtle move, but one that hinted at a possible change in how their dynamic might be evolving in public. At the same time, Harry's position only adds more complexity to the situation. Officially, he stepped away from key royal duties, yet when he appears at major international events, he is still introduced as Prince Harry, receiving a level of recognition typically reserved for active members of the royal family. That contrast creates a kind of gray area that's difficult to define. He no longer fully belongs to that world, yet he isn't completely separated from it either, and when he appears in those settings, standing beside him, Meghan often comes across as someone trying to re-establish a place in an environment that no longer fully embraces her. It creates a situation that leaves many observers unsure of how to interpret what they're seeing. Some insiders have even suggested that keeping Harry's role somewhat undefined may actually serve the institution, allowing flexibility depending on the moment. Recognition seems to appear when it's convenient, while distance is created when it's not. That balance keeps the tension alive and ensures the headlines never really fade.
Because they wanted him to live a life as normal as possible. Cut to Oprah Winfrey interview where Meghan sits down and accuses the palace of not giving her son a title because of his skin color. That was so damaging for the royal family at the time.
Whether people are supportive or critical, the couple remains at the center of attention, and that brief moment on stage only made that underlying tension more visible than before. Harry's decision not to step aside, even in such a subtle way, immediately sparked new questions. Some observers began to wonder whether this was a sign of him choosing his own path, or if it simply reflected a growing reluctance to keep stepping back and allowing someone else to take the spotlight every time. Either way, the situation points to something deeper. The cracks that people once overlooked are becoming harder to hide behind polished images and carefully managed appearances. Because the biggest tensions rarely play out through speeches or public moments, they tend to develop behind closed doors, within the family itself. According to sources close to the couple, Harry still holds on to the idea that his children should experience parts of the tradition he grew up with. One example that continues to come up is Eton, the historic British school attended by generations of prominent figures, including members of the royal family. Reports suggest that Harry has imagined Archie one day walking those same halls, seeing it as more than just an education. For him, it represents heritage, continuity, and a connection to the life he once knew before everything changed. However, Meghan is said to view that future very differently, which adds another layer to the growing sense that their perspectives may not always align as closely as they once appeared. According to insiders, she reportedly prefers raising the children in California, away from the structure and expectations that come with royal traditions. And the disagreement is said to go beyond just geography. Some sources claim that conversations around British schooling have become complicated, with certain conditions needing to be addressed before any decisions move forward. As one insider described it, those conditions could involve financial arrangements, security considerations, or long-term guarantees about how the children would be supported. To some observers, this no longer looks like a typical family discussion, but rather something more complex, a quiet power dynamic playing out behind the scenes.
Came from this very busy world of the royal family with lots to do. Even in his spare time, he could play polo and do whatever he wanted. He sat in Montecito, twiddling his thumbs, thinking, what do I do next? What is my role? Where is my work?
Over time, this issue has started to represent something bigger within their relationship. Many believe Meghan often takes the lead when it comes to major private decisions, guiding the overall direction of the family with a strong sense of control. Meanwhile, Harry, who once appeared more comfortable going along with that dynamic, is now rumored to be showing signs that he may not always agree in the same way as before. Friends have reportedly described him as increasingly frustrated, caught between two worlds, loyalty to the life he has built now, and a deep connection to the one he grew up in. That tension, according to those close to the situation, hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's becoming harder to ignore. There's a certain irony in all of this. Their children have become the focal point of a much larger divide. Tradition on one side, independence on the other. History versus personal freedom. And while the audience that night only saw a brief, awkward moment involving a microphone, people familiar with the couple suggest that the real struggle is happening far away from public view. But even that night wasn't over yet. Meghan's unexpected move onto the stage may have caught everyone off guard, but what happened afterward felt even more telling. As the event continued, organizers quietly made adjustments to the seating arrangement. Instead of remaining in the most visible, central positions, there was a subtle shift, one that placed Meghan slightly further from where the main attention naturally focused. Meghan was then guided to a seat that still kept her within view of the audience, but noticeably removed from the central focus of attention. There was no announcement, no direct explanation, yet the shift was clear enough that it didn't need one. Visually, the change spoke for itself. Her position in the room had subtly but unmistakably changed.
And Meghan specifically told media at the time of Archie's birth that they didn't want to give him a title.
That shift only seemed more noticeable under the spotlight. Observers began focusing on details that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. Her designer gown, likely chosen to stand out, appeared different under the harsh lighting, and online commentary quickly followed. Some described her expression as tense, while others pointed out that her smile seemed controlled, almost too deliberate.
At the same time, Harry appeared completely at ease, moving through the room, engaging with guests, and shaking hands as though the earlier moment on stage had never happened.
Meghan, however, remained seated for most of the evening. She applauded when appropriate, but there was a noticeable distance between her and the conversations happening around her. For someone who is typically positioned at the center of attention, that quiet separation stood out. It wasn't dramatic or openly acknowledged, but it carried a certain weight that didn't go unnoticed. Online, critics quickly focused on the smallest details. The laughter that seemed slightly forced, the posture that appeared more rigid than usual, even the way her jewelry reflected under the lights became points of discussion. To some viewers, it didn't resemble the confident, commanding presence people had come to expect. Instead, it felt like a more restrained version of what had been seen in the past. Supporters offered a different perspective, suggesting it may have simply been an awkward moment or a minor issue with event planning. But those who were reportedly inside the room described it differently. According to witnesses, the shift didn't feel accidental. It was subtle, almost understated, but at the same time, it carried a clear impact. For the first time, Meghan didn't just appear slightly out of place, she seemed deliberately moved out of the spotlight. She looked increasingly sidelined as the night went on. As the event carried forward, there was no sudden shift back in her favor. The audience didn't lean in, didn't redirect attention, didn't create an opening for her to step back into focus. The energy in the room had already moved on, settling into something noticeably cooler and more distant, and it stayed that way. But while that moment played out publicly, something else appeared to be unfolding quietly in the background. Because almost immediately after the event, a different kind of narrative began to take shape. Headlines started appearing within hours, and what stood out wasn't just the speed, but the contradiction. Some outlets framed Harry in a way that echoed his former status, giving him the tone and positioning of a senior royal figure, almost as if nothing had changed.
Truly believe that when he met Meghan, she whispered into his ear, a 36-year-old mature woman whispered into his ear, "Harry, you and I could change the world."
Others took a completely different angle, emphasizing distance, independence, and the fact that he no longer holds an official role within the core structure. That split wasn't random. It created two parallel versions of the same reality, one reinforcing royal relevance, the other reinforcing separation. And when that happens at scale, it rarely feels accidental. It starts to look coordinated, or at the very least, carefully managed from different sides. And that's where the situation becomes much bigger than one awkward moment on stage. Because now it's not just about who stood where or who spoke when, it's about who controls the narrative afterward. In some headlines, he was introduced with full royal styling, complete with formal titles and the kind of language usually reserved for active members of the monarchy. In others, he was framed in the exact opposite way, as someone who had walked away from that world entirely and no longer carried the same standing. That contrast didn't feel accidental or careless. To many watching closely, it looked intentional. By allowing Harry's position to remain undefined, the institution keeps the public in a constant state of uncertainty. Each appearance turns into a new question. Does he still represent the crown, or is he completely separate from it? That ambiguity fuels discussion non-stop. It keeps media outlets engaged, audiences debating, and ensures that no matter where Harry and Meghan go, they remain tied to the royal narrative whether they intend to or not. And within that dynamic, Meghan's role becomes complicated. On one hand, she brings enormous global attention, the kind that guarantees visibility and interest wherever she appears. On the other, that same visibility comes with risk. Because her image divides opinions so strongly, even the smallest awkward moment can escalate instantly, turning into headlines, analysis, and viral clips within hours.
There's Harry telling her to back off. You see his hand here, below his big face, pointing at her, telling her to stay.
Some critics argue that the institution has adapted over time, learning from previous controversies and adjusting its approach. Instead of completely cutting the couple off, it appears they are being kept in a kind of controlled middle ground, close enough to remain relevant in public discussions, yet distant enough to limit any real influence over the core structure. It's a strategy that some observers compare to how other royal-adjacent figures have been handled in the past. Not fully inside the inner circle, but never entirely pushed out either. That in-between positioning creates a constant sense of ambiguity that keeps attention alive without fully committing in either direction. For Meghan, that kind of blurred status can be especially challenging. Every public appearance is scrutinized, every rumor spreads at speed, and even minor moments can quickly grow into major talking points.
For Harry, the pressure takes a different form. It's like existing between two identities, never completely detached from the world he came from, yet not fully embraced by it anymore either.
Together, they seem caught in a cycle that feeds itself, where institutional decisions, media framing, and public reaction all overlap, constantly reshaping how they are seen. Every appearance, every moment, adds another layer, slowly shifting their image under an intense and unforgiving spotlight. And if that moment on stage wasn't already uncomfortable, what followed only pushed things further. What should have been a routine, carefully managed speech turned into something people are still analyzing from every angle. Meghan stepping onto the stage didn't just feel unexpected, it hinted at something deeper beneath the surface.
It's like, where is the mic? Where is the mic? At one point she yelled, give me a f***ing mic, and they didn't give it to her.
The silence from the crowd, Harry holding onto the microphone instead of stepping aside, and the way the moment seemed to quietly vanish from major coverage all pointed towards something more complex unfolding behind the scenes. It didn't look like a one-off awkward interaction. To many watching closely, it felt like a rare glimpse of tension that isn't usually visible in public, because when something like that happens in front of cameras, under bright lights, with hundreds of people watching, it naturally raises bigger questions. If the dynamic looked that strained in public, what does it look like when the cameras are gone? And according to ongoing whispers and commentary circulating among observers, that moment on stage may have been just the surface. What's being discussed behind the scenes suggests the story could go much deeper than what was visible that night. In fact, for many observers, that moment may have marked the start of a much larger shift in how their relationship is being perceived in public. What once looked controlled and carefully balanced is now being questioned in a completely different way. But even that is only part of the story, because there's another layer beginning to surface, one tied to Meghan's family situation, that reportedly caught Harry off guard. The details have surprised even longtime royal watchers, adding a fresh angle that's now fueling even more discussion around the couple. If that moment on stage already felt intense, what comes next takes things further. When people started connecting these pieces, the reaction was immediate, and in many cases, shock.
Here on Palace Loop, we're breaking it all down step by step.
So don't stop here. Check out the next video to see how this situation fully unfolds, and why this latest development has everyone talking.